I had given Westfield Manufacturing the better part of my life. 30 years of alarm clocks before sunrise, missed weekends, emergency shifts, and showing up even when my body begged me not to. 30 years of steel dust in my lungs, machine oil under my fingernails, and the constant hum of the factory floor that still echoed in my ears, even when I lay down to sleep. I'd climbed from assembly line worker to shift supervisor, trained dozens of younger men, who eventually surpassed me in rank, but never in dedication. So when they booked the large training hall at the Riverside Community Center and announced a farewell reception in my honor, I didn't think much of it. I assumed I'd earned one quiet evening of cake and handshakes before fading into the comfortable obscurity of retirement. The room was full, faces from every department crowded around folding tables draped in plastic cloths. There were men I'd mentored years ago, now wearing management badges and expensive watches. Supervisors who barely remembered my name until the memo went out stood in small clusters, nursing coffee from styrofoam cups. My brother Gregory came with his wife Linda, both looking uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. A couple of neighbors I barely spoke to, the Hendersons from 2 houses down, stood near the back, probably there for the free food. Someone had taped a banner above the projector screen. "Congratulations on your retirement, Kristopher." There was a sheet cake from the grocery store bakery, with my name spelled carefully in blue icing, surrounded by little frosting tools and gears. I was midway through a conversation with Vincent from maintenance about fishing boats and the best spots along Lake Meridian when I noticed her. Sofiay, my wife of 26 years. She wasn't dressed casually like everyone else in their jeans and polo shirts. She wore a dark green dress she usually reserved for formal events. Weddings, funerals, anniversary dinners we'd stopped having years ago. Her hair was styled differently, pulled back in a way that made her face look harder, more determined. She wore makeup applied more carefully than usual, like she'd prepared for an important occasion. And in her hand was a thin envelope, legal-sized, stiff manila paper that caught the fluorescent light. She moved through the crowd without hesitation, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor, eyes locked on me with an intensity one hadn't seen in years. No smiles. No greetings to the people she passed, some of whom had known her for decades through company Christmas parties and summer picnics. Just purpose. The conversations around me began to die as people noticed her approach. Vincent's words trailed off mid-sentence. Someone near the cake table stopped laughing. The room developed that peculiar tension that precedes something significant, the way the air feels heavy before a thunderstorm. She stopped an arm's length away and extended the envelope toward me like a process server delivering a summons. "What's this?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew. The formal dress, the timing, the calculated public setting. These weren't coincidences. "Divorce papers," she said, clear and loud enough that Vincent stopped mid-sentence, and at least a dozen people within earshot froze completely. The words hung in the air. Vincent froze, his plastic cup halfway to his mouth. Conversations nearby faltered, then stopped entirely, creating a widening circle of silence around us. I glanced around, dozens of people suddenly pretending not to stare, examining their plates with intense fascination, shifting their weight from foot to foot. "You're doing this here?" I asked quietly, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to flood my system. "At my retirement party?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation, without apology. "Everything's filled out. You just need to sign." I opened the envelope with steady hands, though my pulse had quickened. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Asset division schedules. Support requests itemized in careful legal language. Her signature already sat neatly at the bottom, dated 3 weeks earlier, October 28th, a Tuesday I remembered as ordinary, unremarkable. She hadn't decided this recently. She'd planned it, rehearsed it, probably consulted with friends about the perfect moment for maximum impact. She'd been carrying these papers, waiting for this specific occasion. What she didn't know was that I'd seen this coming for longer than she realized. 18 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in April, I'd left work early with a migraine that felt like an ice pick behind my right eye. I'd driven home through streets blurred by pain and nausea, thinking only of a dark room and silence. When I pulled into our driveway at 2:47 p.m., a time I should have been at work, I saw Sofiay's car parked at an odd angle, as if she'd been in a hurry. And beside it, a silver sedan I didn't recognize, a newer model with dealer plates barely visible. I'd walked slowly toward the front door, fumbling for my keys, when movement in the living room window caught my attention. I looked up, and the world tilted. Sofiay and a man I'd never seen before, tall, younger than me by at least a decade, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly take-home pay. They were standing too close, and as I watched, frozen on my own front lawn while the migraine pounded behind my eyes, he'd cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Not a peck, not an accidental brush of lips. A real kiss, deep and familiar, the kind that spoke of practice and intimacy, and a relationship that had progressed far beyond a single moment of weakness. She'd leaned into him. Her hands had gripped his shoulders. They'd kissed like people who'd done this before many times, who knew each other's rhythms and preferences. I'd stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 or 40 seconds, my migraine temporarily forgotten in the face of this new pain. Then I'd quietly gotten back in my truck, started the engine with shaking hands, and driven to Gregory's house across town, where I'd sat in his garage workshop for 3 hours, saying nothing, just watching him restore an old motorcycle, while I decided what to do with this information that had detonated my understanding of my marriage. I could have confronted her that night, could have burst through the door, demanded explanations, thrown the man out of my house, could have filed for divorce myself, claimed adultery, fought for everything in a bitter legal battle that would have aired every piece of our dirty laundry. But we had children. Tracy was finishing her senior year of college. Arnold was in his first real job, both still building their lives, still needing the stability of parents who were together even if unhappily. A scandal would have devastated them, split them between parents, forced them to choose sides in a war neither of them understood. So I'd made a different choice. I'd come home after she'd called my cell phone at 6:15 p.m., her voice tight with barely concealed irritation masked as concern, asking where I was, saying dinner was getting cold. I'd said the migraine had gotten worse and I'd pulled over to rest, that I'd stopped at a convenience store for medicine and must have dozed off in the parking lot. And then, in the weeks that followed, I'd tried harder than I'd ever tried before. I'd taken her to dinner at Salvatore's, the Italian restaurant she loved downtown where candles flickered on red checkered tablecloths. I'd bought her flowers for no reason, tulips, her favorite, yellow ones that reminded her of spring. I'd asked about her day, really listened to her complaints about her book club friends and their petty dramas, suggested weekend trips to the mountains we never quite managed to take because she was always too busy. I'd tried to save our marriage for the sake of our family, hoping that whatever had driven her to another man's arms could be reversed through attention and effort. But Sofiay had grown colder, more distant, more impatient with every gesture I made. She'd met my efforts with indifference, then irritation, then barely concealed contempt. The flowers went into the trash after 3 days. The dinner conversations were one-sided. The weekend trips never materialized because she always had other plans, other commitments, other places to be that didn't include me. And I'd realized slowly and painfully that she'd already made her choice. She was just waiting for the right moment to make it official, for the right stage on which to deliver her final performance. Apparently, that moment was now. That stage was my retirement party. "Do you have a pen?" I asked, my voice carrying across the silent room. She handed me one without hesitation, a nice one, silver with her initials engraved on the clip. Probably a gift from him, I thought distantly. I signed every required line. No speeches, no objections, no pleas for reconsideration. Blue ink, steady hand, my signature the same as it had been on our marriage certificate over a quarter-century ago in a small church ceremony where we'd both promised forever. The room was silent enough that I could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway and someone's nervous cough near the door and the scratch of pen on paper as I ended 26 years with 4 signatures. When I finished, I returned the envelope and the pen, then leaned in slightly so only she could hear over the silence. "You have no idea what you just set in motion," I said quietly, each word deliberate. Then I turned back to Vincent, whose face had gone pale. "So, you were saying something about the engine rebuild?" Applause broke out near the exit. My daughter, Tracy, stood clapping. Slowly at first, deliberately, each clap distinct and separate. Smiling like she'd just witnessed a victory, like she'd been freed from some burden. My son Arnold followed her lead immediately, his applause louder, more aggressive, faster, drawing others to join in uncertainly. Sofiay turned and walked out with them trailing behind like an entourage following a celebrity, like disciples following their leader to some promised land I wasn't invited to. None of them looked back. Not once. 10 seconds passed. Maybe 15. The applause died awkwardly. Someone coughed. Someone asked if there was more coffee. The regional manager, a nervous man named Walter Briggs, made an awkward joke about never mixing business with pleasure, his laugh too loud in the uncomfortable silence. Life resumed awkwardly, like a scratched record finding its groove after skipping, conversations starting up again in hushed tones, people moving away from me as if I carried some social disease. I stayed, ate cake that tasted like cardboard and regret, accepted a plaque thanking me for my 30 years of dedicated service, a brass plate on fake wood thanking me for sacrificing my life for a company that would replace me within a week. Shook hands with people who'd already forgotten this scene would be the only thing they'd remember about my retirement party, their eyes sliding away from mine, their grips weak and brief. When it ended around 9 o'clock, I drove home alone in my 15-year-old pickup truck, taking the long way through neighborhoods where I'd never lived, past parks where I'd never played with my children because I was always working, thinking about everything and nothing, and the man in the silver sedan and my wife's lips on his. Sofiay's car was gone from the driveway when I arrived. So were most of her clothes from the closet, empty hangers swinging slightly in the air-conditioning breeze. She'd taken the espresso machine I'd bought her for Christmas 3 years ago and her grandmother's dishes, the china set with the blue flowers, but left the couch, the TV, the bookshelf I'd built with my own hands from oak planks, sanding each piece smooth over 3 weekends, applying 3 coats of varnish, installing it proudly against the living room wall. I sat there in the quiet house that suddenly felt larger and emptier, and felt nothing dramatic, no rage, no heartbreak, no desperate urge to call her and beg her to reconsider. Just clarity. She thought she'd prepared for everything. She'd consulted an attorney, filed paperwork, choreographed the perfect public exit designed to humiliate me and garner sympathy for herself. She hadn't prepared for me. Hadn't prepared for what I knew. Hadn't prepared for what I'd been quietly arranging for the past 4 months. 3 months would be enough for her to understand that. The following week passed without a word from her. No phone calls, no texts, no emails about logistics or forgotten belongings. Just silence. I kept my routine because old habits don't die just because your job does. Up at 6, shower, shave, breakfast at 7, eggs and toast, orange juice, the morning paper spread across the kitchen table. I read the obituaries first now, checking for familiar names, grateful each day not to find my own. On Tuesday morning, I visited a different bank branch, the one across town near the shopping mall, not the neighborhood branch where Sofiay knew all the tellers by name. I had an appointment with a banker named Elena Rodriguez, a professional woman in her 40s who looked at my documents without judgment or curiosity. I need to separate my finances, I told her plainly. She reviewed the accounts on her computer screen, scrolling through years of deposits and withdrawals, mortgage payments and utility bills. You have a joint checking account with your wife and a personal savings account that's solely in your name. I want to open a new checking account in my name only. Transfer exactly half of the joint funds to it. She nodded, unfazed, probably having handled a dozen similar situations that month alone. Current balance in the joint account is $9,180. Your share would be $4,590. That works perfectly. 20 minutes later, it was done. New account opened, money transferred, debit card ordered. I left the bank feeling lighter somehow, like I'd shed weight I hadn't known I was carrying. That afternoon, I met with an attorney, nothing fancy, no downtown high-rise office or mahogany desk. His office was above a dry cleaner on Palmer Avenue, accessible by a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. His name was Thomas Reynolds, and he came recommended by Vincent from work whose brother had used him during his own divorce 5 years earlier. Reynolds was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and reading glasses. He kept pushing up his nose. His office was cluttered but organized, case files stacked neatly, law books lining the walls, a desk covered in yellow legal pads filled with cramped handwriting. After reading Sofiay's petition carefully, he raised an eyebrow and looked at me over his glasses. She thinks the house at 847 Maple Grove still has a mortgage? Yes, apparently. And your name is the only one on the deed? Correct. I paid off the remaining balance 4 months ago. $47,000 from my retirement account early withdrawal. He leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in protest, and smiled faintly. Then she's in for quite a surprise. Over the next 2 hours, we compiled everything Sofiay didn't know or had conveniently forgotten. The house paid off months before she filed, the IRA rollover I'd completed after leaving Westfield, the savings account she'd never asked about that had grown steadily through careful investments and compound interest, the truck titled solely in my name that she'd refused to drive because she said it was too masculine. By Friday afternoon, the response was filed with the family court. 12 pages of facts, supported by bank statements, property records, and account documentation. No drama. No emotional appeals. Just reality, spelled out in legal terminology and numbered paragraphs. Sofiay's attorney called Thomas Reynolds the following Tuesday. A woman named Patricia Caldwell, who had a reputation for aggressive representation and usually won substantial settlements for her clients. She wanted to expedite the proceedings, move things along quickly, get this wrapped up so both parties could move on with their lives. Thomas laughed when he hung up the phone. Let her learn patience. Then came the phone calls from my children. First Tracy, then Arnold. Both using nearly identical language, which told me they'd rehearsed together or been coached by their mother. Accusations of being cold and vindictive. Questions about why I wouldn't just do the right thing and give their mother what she deserved after 26 years of marriage. Cold would have been yelling at the retirement party. Cold would have been revenge affairs or burning her clothes, or any of the dramatic gestures people imagine in these situations. This was precision. This was documentation. This was truth. Your mother handed me divorce papers in front of 50 people, I told Arnold during our last conversation. She chose that moment, that method, that humiliation. I simply signed what she gave me and told my attorney to respond honestly. He had no answer for that. When Sofiay finally received Thomas's response, hand-delivered by a process server to the apartment she was renting month to month near the University District, she panicked. I know this because Tracy called me at 11 o'clock at night, her voice high and strained. She's saying you had money, that you're stealing her house, that you've been planning this for years. I wasn't hiding anything, I said calmly. I was paying bills, saving money, and maintaining the home we both lived in. The only difference is that this time she wasn't paying attention. She says she had no idea the house was paid off. That's because she never asked. She never looked at the statements I left on the kitchen counter. She never attended the meetings with the mortgage company. She was too busy with her book club and her friends and her other interests. I almost said her affair, but I held back. That card would be played if necessary, but not yet. This isn't right, Tracy said, but she sounded less certain now. Your mother filed for divorce. Your mother chose the time and place. Your mother's attorney wrote those papers. I'm simply responding to what was started. That isn't wrong, it's procedure. She hung up without saying goodbye. 3 months to the day after the retirement party, I was outside working on the back porch railing that had been loose for 2 years when Sofiay pulled up in a small sedan I didn't recognize, probably a rental or borrowed from a friend. She didn't come alone. A woman waited in the driver's seat, engine running, ready for a quick escape if necessary. We need to talk, Sofiay said, climbing out of the car. She looked thinner, tired, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of the careful style from the party. About what? She waved papers, more legal documents, probably motions or demands from Patricia Caldwell. About what your lawyer's doing. About how you're trying to take everything. He's responding to what you filed. Everything in that response is documented and truthful. She climbed the porch steps, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. I lived in that house for nearly 20 years, Kristopher. You did. And now you're saying I get nothing from it? I'm saying you get what the law allows based on ownership, equity contribution, and the prenuptial understanding we had about assets brought into the marriage. She started crying, not the dramatic sobbing I'd expected, but quiet tears of genuine disbelief. This isn't how it was supposed to go. How did you expect it to go? I asked, setting down my hammer. She hesitated, wiping her eyes. My lawyer said I'd be taken care of. That after 26 years, the court would see I deserved half of everything. Then she didn't do her homework. Or she told you what you wanted to hear to get you to sign her retainer agreement. The truth was sharper. Sofiay needed money. She needed stable housing. She needed support. She'd left expecting to walk away with half of a valuable property and ongoing spousal maintenance. Instead, she was discovering that the house she'd assumed was mortgaged and jointly owned was actually mine, fully paid, and protected by inheritance laws and premarital agreements she'd signed without reading carefully. You wanted independence, I said quietly. You wanted to walk away. This is what it costs. Her friend urged her back to the car, calling her name nervously. Before leaving, Sofiay turned at the bottom of the steps. The kids are ashamed of you. Tracy apologized last week, I said evenly. Brought me coffee and sat in this same spot for an hour talking about how she should have asked me what really happened instead of assuming. So no, I don't think they're ashamed. I think they're learning that there are two sides to every story. The car left quickly, tires squealing slightly as it turned the corner. I went back to my repairs, tightening bolts, replacing rotted wood, restoring what had been neglected. By week 6, the story Sofiay had built was cracking like old paint under pressure. I was in Fletcher's Hardware on Saturday morning, grabbing sandpaper and wood stain, when I saw Arnold in the paint aisle, holding sample cards up to the light like they might reveal some hidden truth about color and life. "Dad," he said, spotting me. "Arnold." We stood there awkwardly among paint cans and roller trays, two men who shared DNA, but had somehow become strangers. "How've you been?" "Fine. Keeping busy." "Yeah, same here." He shifted his weight, clutching the paint samples. "Tracy said you two talked." "She called. We met for coffee. She asked questions. I answered honestly." Another silence, longer this time. "About the party," he said finally, not quite meeting my eyes. "We didn't think you'd just sign. Right there. We thought you'd argue, or refuse, or at least make her wait." "What alternative did you imagine? A public debate?" "Your mother made her decision and delivered it in front of an audience. I could either sign or create an even bigger scene. I chose dignity." He swallowed hard. "She told us you'd both been unhappy for years. That you'd checked out emotionally, stopped trying, just went through the motions. And you didn't think to ask me if that was true?" He flushed red. "She's our mom. And I'm your father." He had nothing to say to that, just stared at his expensive sneakers. Some brand I'd never heard of, probably costing more than I'd spent on shoes in the last 5 years combined. "She's staying with friends," he said after a long moment. "Can't find an apartment she can afford on what she makes at the bookstore. She didn't know the house was paid off. Didn't know about the savings. She thought there'd be more to split." "That's because she never asked," I said simply. "I deposited my paycheck every 2 weeks for 30 years. Paid the bills when they came. Saved what remained. Same routine, same system. The only difference is this time she wasn't paying attention to the results." He stared at his paint samples, shades of beige and gray that all looked identical to me. "Her lawyer's fighting the asset split hard," he murmured. "Mom says it's not fair." "Of course she's fighting. That's what Patricia Caldwell does. She fights aggressively and bills by the hour. But fair isn't about feelings. Fair is about facts, and the facts are documented in 30 years of bank records, property deeds, and account statements." I paid for my supplies and walked out. Arnold didn't follow, just stood there among the paint samples, maybe finally starting to wonder if the story he'd been told was the whole story. The hearing was scheduled for early December in Family Court, a gray bureaucratic building downtown, where hundreds of families came to legally dissolve what they'd once promised to preserve forever. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Eleanor Grantham, reviewed the documents with careful attention, occasionally peering over her reading glasses at Patricia Caldwell and Thomas Reynolds as they presented their arguments. Patricia argued for equitable distribution despite the deed situation, citing Sofiay's non-financial contributions, her years of homemaking, her sacrifice of career opportunities. Thomas calmly presented the prenuptial agreement, the inheritance documentation showing my father's money had funded the down payment, the deed records, the mortgage payment history all from my accounts, and the final payoff documentation. Judge Grantham wasn't impressed with Patricia's arguments. "Motion denied," she said firmly. "The house remains the separate property of Mr. Kristopher Hendricks. Mrs. Sofiay Hendricks is entitled to her portion of genuinely joint assets as outlined in the response filing, but no claim to the residential property exists under the law." Settlement followed shortly after. No house. No ongoing support. Just her half of the joint checking account, $4,590, and her personal possessions. Sofiay had walked away from our marriage expecting freedom and financial security. She got freedom. The security she'd counted on had never actually been hers. Life grew quieter after the judgment. I fell into new rhythms, morning walks around the lake, afternoons in the workshop building furniture I'd always meant to make, evenings reading books I'd bought years ago but never opened. The house felt different now, like it was finally breathing properly after years of held breath. Months later, on a warm Saturday in April, my children showed up unannounced. Both of them together, carrying lumber and tools. "We thought we'd help you finish that deck you started," Tracy said, not quite looking at me. Arnold just nodded, already measuring boards. We worked most of the day without much talking. Just the sounds of sawing and hammering, the smell of fresh wood, the satisfaction of building something solid and level and true. Afterward, we sat on the completed deck eating pizza from boxes, drinking beer from bottles, watching the sun set behind the trees that bordered my property. "I'm sorry," Tracy said quietly. "For that night. For clapping. For not asking your side." "Me too," Arnold added. I nodded, not needing to say more. Something fragile but real was being rebuilt between us, and it would take time, but time was something I finally had. I never heard from Sofiay again after the final papers were signed. And that was fine. I had my home, paid for with my own labor and my father's legacy. I had my time, no longer dictated by factory whistles or shift schedules. I had my peace, earned through patience and precision, and refusing to be broken by someone else's cruelty. Most importantly, I had my life back. And for the first time in decades, my life finally belonged completely to me. The man who'd spent 30 years building a future while his wife planned her exit had won not through anger or revenge, but through simple, careful attention to truth. Some victories don't require dramatic gestures. Sometimes you just need to keep your receipts and remember that paperwork matters more than promises. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.